Welcome. We're still looking at the fundamentals of the language, at the basic constructs. And for the time being, we're simply looking at the client within the browser. Now, a lot of the fundamentals will carry on to server and database, but for now, we're simply speaking in the context of the browser. Here's the material which you can find online and some of the content that you can use to prepare for the exercises. Now, to begin with, I'm going to be talking about some of the context of how the computation gets performed within the browser, and some of the challenges that beginners have is that we're really talking about three different languages. We're talking about HTML, we're talking about CSS, and we're talking about JavaScript. Now, all of those come together within the browser to create the front end experience that you normally have in a browser. Again, as I mentioned before, once we move on to server and database, that will no longer be the case. In that case, we will only be talking about JavaScript. But for now, in the client, we will talk about all three of them together. And so today, I wanted to give you an introduction to try to illustrate these concepts. To do that, as you can see here, I have an editor on the left-hand side of the screen, and on the right-hand side, I am going to drag and drop that file into the browser. And I want to illustrate some fundamentals here. The very first thing that I want to do is I want to show you what happens if I write hello world. And I will make my font a little bit bigger so that you can see it better. Now, what do you think will happen when I reload that page? Now I'm going to go ahead and do that. And as you can see there, I have hello world. Why did that happen? The reason is because I simply wrote text without any support of any kind. I am not using HTML. I am not using CSS. I am not using JavaScript. I'm simply typing text onto the page. And so the browser doesn't know what to do with it. And so it simply shows us that text that we just entered. Now, if we went ahead and created a tag, in this case, I'm going to create an h1 tag, as you can see there, and I'm going to cut and paste the text that I wrote before into it, and I reload the page. As you can see, the text, it looks different. And the reason is because I wrote a header tag, an h1 header tag. Now, at the beginning of the days of the web, HTML was envisioned to be layout. And so there's a handful of tags that define documents. HTML defines the layout. And so when I wrote hello world into the tag, the browser immediately recognized what I was trying to do, and it constructed the layout that you see before you. Now, you might be wondering, what about the HTML definition of the file, the additional tags? Well, it turns out that the browser is actually smart enough that it knows that I'm writing a document and fills in the rest. So if I go ahead and take a look here and I inspect my element, and I'm going to go ahead and close some of this because it is getting in our way, you can see there that we have HTML, head, body, and so on that the browser has actually generated for us. Now, in general, I'm doing this simply for illustration purposes, you want to try to give the browser as much guidance as you can, because otherwise it might do things that you do not expect. So another thing that I'm going to show you is that if I wrote a div tag, and you can think of a div as a placeholder, we can then style the text that we will enter at the tag. And for this, we enter the style attribute, as you can see here. And I'm going to grab the text that we had before, and I'm going to put it inside of the div. And if I reload the page at this point, you will see that we have, once again, no style because we have defined no style. However, I can add a property here of font size, and I'm going to enter something quite large. Let's do 10 EM. And there's a number of ways in which you can specify font size. You can do it by pixel, you can do it by percentage. In this case, I've entered EM. And you can see there that it is in fact so large that you can hardly see it. But note, we're again using a tag to communicate instructions to the browser that it then uses to render and lay out the code that we have written onto the page. Now, you could write that style in a style tag that all of the divs in the page could inherit. So I'm going to do that next. If I enter style here, and I'm going to remove the style because that is the default, and I'm going to grab this style that we have here, and I'm going to say that for every div that we enter, use the same style. And so if we go ahead and remove the style here, we'll see that if we reload the page, we continue to get the same formatting. And let me just change the formatting here, or the style, so that you can see that in fact it does change. And now the interesting thing is that all divs that we create would inherit that same style. So here I'm going to say good morning, and I'm going to save. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so we can see it all. And when I reload the page, you can see that both tags get the same formatting. Now, when you have a lot of styles, as is often the case on a large site, they become too overwhelming or too unwieldy to have in the same page. And so you'll often see that a separate file, in this case we're going to save this file. I'm simply saving it to my desktop here, and I'm going to call it styles.css. And I'm simply going to enter the styles that we already wrote onto the page. I'm going to save that file. I'm going to delete this, and then I need to link to it. So I enter the link tag, and I'm going to simply enter the name of the file, which in this case is styles.css. And if we reload the page, you can see there that the same style remains. Let's go ahead and make our style smaller so that you can see that that change is taking place. And so you can see there that you can write text simply on the browser page or on the HTML file, which gets presented simply as text. You can use style at the tag level, you can use style at the page level, or you can break it, or you can pull it out onto a file unto itself to sort of clean up what you have within the page. Okay, so what we have been using so far has been HTML and CSS. Let me go ahead and close this file because we won't use it anymore. I'm going to clean up the file. And simply to go back to my diagram, we've been using HTML and CSS. Now we're going to write some JavaScript. And so the way in which we communicate this to the browser is that we use a script tag. We tell it everything that we write within these tags, it's going to be JavaScript. So treat it differently. We'll start off here simply by writing again to the console. We'll enter here an instruction, which is document.write. And we are going to say hello world once more. And when we reload the page, you can see there that we are saying hello world onto the page. Now we have ignored the HTML, we have ignored the CSS, the styles, and we're simply controlling, in this case, everything from the JavaScript side. Now if we wanted to style this, we could include that here. I'm going to go ahead and close my tag. And I'm going to reload my page. And as you can see there, we get the heading tag once more. However, note we are ignoring the HTML that's in the page, we're ignoring the styles of the page, and we're simply taking control from the JavaScript side. Now you may be wondering, how do you bring together both the script and the HTML? And we're going to do that next. I'm going to go ahead and remove this. I'll go ahead and write a traditional HTML structure or some boilerplate here. And I'm going to write a function. This is how we write functions. And this function is simply going to say hello. and we're going to do another document.write, and we'll say hello from the document.write, and I'll say hello world once more. And we're going to, if we reload this now, you'll see that we see nothing, and it's because we have not invoked that function. And in order to do that, I'm going to write an HTML button that is going to call the function that we have within JavaScript. And this is how we can connect the two. So I'm going to do that next button, and I'm going to use the onClick event, and within the onClick event I'm going to call that function, say hello, as you can see there. Now I'm going to give it some text so that we can see it. If I load it up in the browser right now, we see the button but we see no text, and I'm going to simply say call say hello function. What you write doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and load that. And when I click on the button, you can see there that it takes over the page and removes whatever is there, and it simply overwrites it with hello world. Now, if we wanted to write back into the document, we can do that. And I'm going to create here a div that I'll use as a placeholder. I'll give it an identifier that we will use to grab hold with from the JavaScript side, as you'll see in a moment. And I'm going to call this the target. I'm going to make my font just a little bit smaller so that we can fit everything there onto the page. Now, the way that we can write into that function is that we can make use of a feature of the language, which is built in, that allows us to get that element by ID, as you can see. And we'll use the ID that we gave the div, which is target. And then we set the inner HTML, and we'll set it in this case to be hello. Well, let's say good morning this time, just to vary it. And we'll close our statement there. And now we're going to go ahead and reload the page. And as you can see there, we have the say hello function. And if all goes well, when I press this button, we should get that message below it. And as you can see there, we did. So you can see here how we can connect and manipulate what you see on the browser page by using JavaScript. Now, the last thing that we'll walk through is how to do positioning of an element within the page. So I'm going to start off by referencing an image that I have here on my desktop. I'm going to use the image tag, and the image that I have is called ball.png. And before I do anything else, let me remove this function since we will not need it anymore, is I'm simply going to reload that image. And as you can see there, I have the image. And so let me size the browser to the default 100% size. And now I'm going to set style on this image, and I will use it to set some properties. The first thing that I'm going to enter is position, and I'm going to enter absolute. After that, I'm going to enter the left property, and you can think this as the x coordinate, and I will enter 100 pixels. I will then set the top property. You can think of this as the y, the vertical coordinate. I'm going to enter 150 there. And so if I reload the page, you'll see that the image has moved. And that is because I am moving, or I'm placing that image using absolute positioning. Now, just as before, we can interact with our image from JavaScript, and so we'll write a function called moveBall, where we will enter new coordinates to move that ball once again. And so the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to get a handle on the ball, and we'll enter an ID for it in a second. We'll do get element by ID, and we'll call it ball. And again, let me make my font a little smaller so you can see there. And I'm going to, Well, before we do that, let me go ahead and enter ball here. And there we go. And now I'm going to give the image that ID. The ID is going to be ball. So let's review what I'm doing here. I'm accessing through the document, getting element by ID, using the ID of ball, which is what we just entered, and assigning that to a variable called ball within this function on the JavaScript side. Now once we do that, we can go ahead and assign the property of top and left using style. So we'll enter top. We'll enter here 300 pixels. We'll enter then ball.style.left, and we'll enter 250 pixels. Make sure you enter pixels, otherwise the position will not be valid. I'm going to go ahead and save the file. Well, and before we load it up in the page, we need to give ourselves a button so that we can call that function. And on click, I am going to call move ball. Okay, well, and I should give myself some text. And I'll say move ball. I'm going to go ahead and save it. And as you can see there, we have a move ball button. And if all goes well, when I click on this, the ball should move. And yes, you can see there how that has moved. Now the last thing that we can do is that we can add a timer, and we can continuously on each loop of this timer increment the position of the ball so that we can get some motion. So I'm going to go ahead and do that next. In order to do that, I'm going to create a variable, a global variable called x. Then I'm going to enter y. I'm going to enter 150 for the y variable. I'm simply using the same positions that we have here, the initial positions of the ball. Now inside of the function, I'm going to increment that position, and I will do that. Well, let me use the long way of doing that. I will increase it by 5 pixels each time. I will do the same thing for x. And I will then simply add the pixel to the value that we have. So I'm going to do the same thing here for the x value. And then we're going to add a timer. And this is what will cause the function to call itself. And on each subsequent loop, again, it will increase the position by 5 pixels. So I'm going to set a timeout. And this is simply a feature of the language. This is a timer which takes first the name of the function that you're going to call, followed by the time increment. So I'm going to call it here every second, and I will end the function there. So if all goes well, once we call the function once, it will continue to call itself at a 1 second interval, and it will increase those coordinates, and so we should see some movement of the ball. So I'm going to go ahead and start and calling the function there, and you can see there that every 1 second the ball is moving across the screen. Now you could do a lot more with this. You could make it also a lot smoother. Well, actually, let's go ahead and try that. I'm going to call it every 100 milliseconds, and so this should be a lot faster. And as you can see there it goes. But I'll let you go ahead and play with it. Now, using a lot of these principles that we've covered here, we went from the bare bone text to using HTML to using CSS to manipulating with JavaScript. Go ahead and do the following exercises within the lesson. So with that, I wish you happy coding and goodbye.